The ship drifted in the quiet void above Kepral 4, a once thriving colony now shrouded in a sickly haze. From orbit, the planet's surface appeared mottled with irregular blotches of crimson and gray, the telltale signs of the plague that had swept through its cities in mere weeks. The galactic broadcast relays had gone silent 2 days prior, but not before sending a final, desperate plea for help. What remained of the population was unknown. Inside the command deck of the IMA Valiance, a tension thicker than vacuum permeated the air. Tavarin Lek, a Lorvanian xenobiologist with 4 spiral horns curling elegantly from his scalp, stood at the center of the hollow projection table, gesturing to a rapidly spinning model of the virus. His golden skin glimmered faintly, though the exhaustion in his posture betrayed the urgency that had driven him and his team for the last 72 hours. "This isn't just a pathogen," Tavarin declared, his voice low and taut. "It's a biological demolition crew." The model expanded, revealing clusters of the virus breaking down alien DNA strands. "It doesn't just kill. It dismantles every form of molecular resistance. Its adaptability is unmatched." Around the table, representatives of the Galactic Union's finest species stood in grim silence. There was General Sarrock of the Korthan military, his 6 crimson eyes narrowing as his clawed hand clenched the edge of the table. Beside him, Lien Kor, a pale-skinned Arvakian diplomat, adjusted the silken robes draped over her lithe frame, a nervous tic that betrayed the cracks in her diplomatic composure. The room was missing one thing: hope. The silence broke with the arrival of a small contingent stepping into the room. Among them was Dr. Elena Carter, a human virologist with wild curls barely tamed into a loose ponytail. She looked out of place among the taller, more exotic beings in the room, her Earth-standard uniform utilitarian compared to their flowing robes and armor. Beside her, 2 more humans flanked her, Lieutenant Mason Harper and Captain Rajiv Patel, both visibly uneasy under the scrutiny of alien eyes. "You're late," Sarrock growled, his deep voice resonating with barely concealed disdain. Elena raised an eyebrow, but bit back the retort forming on her lips. She'd been warned repeatedly about the skepticism humans faced in these circles. "My apologies," she said instead, with the measured calm of someone who had learned to navigate diplomatic minefields. "Our shuttle was delayed in decontamination. If you need additional briefings, we don't have the time," Lien added, her tone sharp. "The death toll is climbing exponentially. Every moment we delay costs lives." Elena ignored the remark and turned to Tavarin. "I understand the virus spreads through aerosolized particles and can survive extreme conditions. Has anyone isolated its point of origin?" Tavarin's eyes glinted with something akin to respect. Kepral 4 was the first reported site, but it's clear this wasn't natural. The level of precision in its design suggests intentional engineering. He hesitated, glancing at Lien. "That raises complications of its own." Elena frowned. "A bioweapon?" "An unthinkable one," Sarrock interjected. "No civilization would unleash something this indiscriminate. It doesn't just target one species. It annihilates everything in its path." The room fell silent again, the weight of Sarrock's words pressing down on them all. It wasn't just a galactic crisis. It was a collapse of the trust that held the Union together. "Let's focus on what we can control," Elena said, forcing a steadiness in her voice that she didn't entirely feel. "I brought samples of Earth-based antibodies and antiviral compounds. If we can find any overlap—" "You don't understand," Tavarin interrupted, frustration creeping into his voice. "This virus is evolving faster than we can study it. It adapts to every countermeasure we throw at it. Even your so-called robust immune systems won't save you if—" A piercing alarm cut through the conversation, and a voice echoed over the comms. "Incoming distress signal. It's faint but active." General Sarrock's claws tapped against the table as the hollow projection shifted. The signal source was from the outskirts of Kepral IV's main city. "Survivors," he muttered. Tavarin's expression darkened. "Or carriers." Captain Patel, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "If there are survivors, we can't ignore them. Whether they're carriers or not, they might have valuable data, or even immunity." He looked to Elena. She nodded. It's a risk, but one we have to take. We're not going to solve this in a sterile lab. The Corps then General bristled, but said nothing. Patel took the silence as consent. Within the hour, the team was on the surface, navigating the eerie ruins of Kepral 4. The city was a monument to abandonment. Streets once filled with vibrant alien life were silent, the air thick with a faint metallic tang. The faint hum of quarantine drones patrolling above added to the surreal atmosphere. Elena's boots crunched on the debris-strewn ground as she scanned her surroundings. Her handheld bioscanner blinked with faint traces of organic signatures. There's something nearby, she whispered, glancing at Patel. Ahead, Mason Harper raised his plasma rifle, his gaze sweeping the narrow alleyways that stretched into darkness. This place feels wrong, he muttered. They found the source of the signal inside a half-collapsed building. The door slid open with a groan, revealing a huddled figure at the center of the room. It was an alien child, its greenish skin marred with splotches of red and gray. The child's breathing was shallow, its large, luminescent eyes flickering weakly. Still alive, Elena murmured, kneeling beside the child. She glanced at her scanner and frowned. No viral markers. How is that possible? Could be dormant, Tavarin said, stepping in behind her. Or the signal's too faint to detect. We need to move carefully. The child whimpered, a faint sound that sent chills down Elena's spine. She reached out, her hand brushing against its fragile arm. The scanner beeped again, and a line of data scrolled across the screen. Her eyes widened. This isn't just a survivor, she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and dread. There's something unique about its biology. It might hold the key. As she spoke, the child's gaze fixed on her, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something strange, a glimmer of recognition, as though it understood far more than its age suggested. Before anyone could react, a deep rumble shook the building. Mason Harper cursed under his breath. We got company. Outside, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. They were humanoid but wrong. Twisted, shambling figures whose bodies bore the grotesque hallmarks of the plague. Their movements were jerky, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Tavarin took a step back, his voice trembling. They're not alive, but they're not dead either. Patel barked an order. Form up, protect the kid, and fall back to the shuttle. The first figure lunged and chaos erupted. Plasma bolts lit the air, and the acrid smell of burning flesh mixed with the metallic tang of the atmosphere. Elena clutched the child tightly, her heart pounding as she followed the team into the street. As they reached the extraction point, a thought gnawed at her mind. The child's unique biology wasn't just a clue. It might be the galaxy's last chance. But with horrors closing in and answers still out of reach, she couldn't shake the feeling that their fight had only just begun. The lab aboard the IMA Valiance was a cacophony of controlled chaos. Holoscreens displayed layers of genetic data, each strand unraveling into cascading waves of color-coded information. Dr. Elena Carter stood at the center, her hands trembling slightly as she analyzed the child's blood sample. It glowed faintly under the scanner, the alien serum almost luminous against the sterile white of the lab equipment. Tavarin Lex stood across from her, his golden skin pale under the harsh overhead lights. He had been silent for the past hour, save for the occasional muttered observation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of disbelief. This child's immune system isn't fighting the virus. It's assimilating it. Elena looked up sharply. Assimilating? You're saying it's incorporating the virus into its biology? Not just incorporating, Tavarin said, gesturing at the screen. Look at this. The viral RNA is being rewritten, neutralized as it integrates. This isn't resistance. It's something entirely different. It's as though the child's biology is teaching the virus to coexist. The revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Elena felt the weight of it settle in her chest. Beside her, Captain Patel leaned over the display, his brow furrowed in thought. If that's true, we might have the beginnings of a cure, he said. Something we can replicate. It's not that simple, Tavrin snapped, his frustration bubbling to the surface. This level of biological adaptation is unprecedented. Replicating it could take years, maybe decades. Meanwhile, the galaxy burns. Patel straightened, his jaw tightening. Then we don't have years. We figure out how to accelerate the process. Or this child's immunity means nothing. Elena turned back to the child, who lay quietly in a containment unit nearby, its breathing steady but shallow. The alien boy's glowing eyes flickered open, and for a moment, they locked onto hers. There was an intelligence there, a depth that seemed impossibly old for such a young being. She swallowed hard. "We need more data," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Comparative samples, something to show if this adaptation is unique to the child or if there's a broader pattern we're missing." Tavrin shook his head. "You're suggesting bringing more survivors aboard? That's reckless. Every exposed organism is a potential vector. The quarantine protocols are already stretched thin." "It's not reckless," Elena countered, her tone firm. "It's necessary. If we're going to understand this, we need more than a single data point." Their argument was interrupted by a sudden chime from the comms panel. General Sarok's deep voice crackled through the speakers. "Dr. Carter, report to the command deck immediately. There's been a development." Elena glanced at Patel, who nodded. "Go," he said. "We'll keep working here." Moments later, Elena stepped into the command deck, where Sarok and Lien Kor stood before the central holo display. The image showed a ship, battered and listing, transmitting a weak distress signal. "We found another survivor," Sarok said, his tone grim. "A cargo freighter limping through the outer edges of the system. Its crew is still alive, but they're reporting advanced symptoms of the plague." Elena's stomach tightened. "How advanced?" "Late stage," Lien said, her voice clipped. "Their bioscans show extensive cellular degradation. They won't last much longer." Elena's mind raced. Late stage meant the virus was at its most aggressive, consuming the host's body at a molecular level. But if the freighter's crew had lasted this long, it might mean there were anomalies in the virus's behavior, or in the crew's physiology. "I'll go," she said without hesitation. Lien frowned. "You're too valuable to risk, Dr. Carter. Send someone else." "I'm the one with the expertise," Elena shot back. "And we're running out of time. If there's even a chance that these survivors can give us answers, I have to see it myself." Sarok's 6 eyes regarded her in silence before he gave a curt nod. "Very well. But you're taking a full escort, and the moment it looks unsafe, you're to extract immediately." "Understood?" Elena nodded, already turning to leave. The freighter was a ghost ship. Its corridors were dimly lit, the emergency lighting casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Elena's breath echoed inside her helmet as she moved cautiously through the narrow passageways, Patel and Harper flanking her with weapons drawn. They found the crew in the mess hall, or what was left of it. 4 figures sat slumped at a table, their skin mottled with the same red and gray lesions Elena had seen on the surface of Kepral 4. One of them, a Zalithian woman with translucent blue skin, lifted her head as they entered, her gaze unfocused but alive. You're real," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "We're here to help," Elena said, kneeling beside the woman. She scanned her quickly, her bioscanner blinking red with multiple critical alerts. The woman's vitals were failing, her cellular structure collapsing under the virus's assault. "We were transporting relief supplies," the Zalithian murmured. "Didn't know until it was too late." Elena's throat tightened. "You've held on longer than most," she said gently. "We're trying to understand why. Can you tell me anything about what happened?" The woman's breathing grew shallower, and Elena felt a pang of helplessness. But then, the Zalithian's hand twitched, weakly gesturing to a small container on the table. Elena opened it and found several vials of a viscous green liquid. She held one up, examining it closely. "What is this?" "Medicine," the woman whispered. "Experimental. Didn't work, but slowed it down." Elena's mind raced. If the substance had delayed the virus's progression, even imperfectly, it could provide vital clues. She carefully secured the vials in a sealed case and turned back to the woman. "Thank you. You've given us a chance." The Zilithian smiled faintly, her luminescent eyes dimming. "Save them," she murmured before slumping forward, the last flicker of life leaving her body. Elena closed her eyes, a wave of grief washing over her. But there was no time to dwell. She stood, clutching the case tightly. "We have what we need," she said, her voice resolute. "Let's get back to the ship." As they retraced their steps, the weight of their mission bore down on Elena. The virus was relentless, but so was she. With the child's unique biology and the freighter crew's experimental medicine, they were one step closer to a solution. But in the back of her mind, a question loomed. How much more would they have to sacrifice before the galaxy could heal? The IMA Valiance vibrated with urgency, its corridors a hive of movement as Elena Carter hurried toward the containment lab. The vials from the Zilithian freighter had sparked a flurry of research, their contents already yielding a cascade of insights. Yet the breakthroughs were overshadowed by the growing unease permeating the ship. The virus wasn't waiting for them to find answers. Inside the lab, Tavarin Lek was hunched over a hollow projector, his golden skin bathed in shifting hues of green and blue as he studied the data. His expression, usually calm and measured, was tight with concentration. "Tell me you've got something," Elena said, stepping into the room. Tavarin didn't look up. "The experimental compound from the freighter, it's not a cure, but it's slowing the virus's replication. I've isolated the mechanism. It's attacking the enzyme the virus uses to multiply." "That's good," Elena said cautiously. "It's a dead end," Tavarin interrupted, his frustration evident. "The compound is too unstable. It breaks down after a few hours. Even if we could stabilize it, the virus would adapt faster than we can modify it." Elena frowned, leaning over the console. The data scrolled past in endless waves of molecular diagrams and chemical equations, all of it blurring into a hopeless tangle. "What about combining it with the child's adaptive response?" Tavarin glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. "That's where things get complicated. The child's immune system doesn't just adapt, it rewrites. It's altering its own genetic code to accommodate the virus. And that's a bad thing?" "It's unprecedented," Tavarin said. "The risk of integrating such a response into other species is astronomical. We could inadvertently trigger mutations we can't control." The weight of his words settled over the room, but Elena refused to let it crush her. She stepped away from the console, her gaze shifting to the containment unit where the alien child rested. The boy's breathing was steady, his glowing eyes watching her with a calm that belied the chaos around them. "You're not scared, are you?" she murmured, more to herself than to the child. A soft chime from the comms interrupted her thoughts. General Sarok's voice crackled through. "Dr. Carter, report to the command deck." "Now." Her stomach knotted. She glanced at Tavarin, who nodded. "Go. I'll keep working." The command deck was tense when she arrived, the atmosphere electric with unease. Sarok stood at the central hollow table, flanked by Lien Kaur and Captain Patel. The display showed a ship, sleek and angular, its black hull bristling with weaponry. "It just entered the system," Sarok said, his voice grim. "No transponder, no communication. But it's heading straight for us." "A warship?" Elena asked. "Unclear," Lien said, her tone clipped. "But its trajectory is deliberate. Whoever they are, they know we're here. Could it be related to the virus?" Patel asked. "It's likely," Sarok said. "And if it is, we're looking at a new level of threat. Biological warfare wasn't an accident. It was a strategy." Elena's mind raced. The virus was terrifying enough on its own, but the thought of it being deliberately unleashed added a layer of malice she hadn't prepared for. "What's the plan?" "We hold our position," Sarok said. "If they're hostile, we engage." "They might have answers," Elena said quickly. "If they're responsible for the virus, they might also have a countermeasure." Sarok's eyes narrowed. "And they might also kill us on sight." Patel stepped forward. "We can't afford to lose this opportunity. If there's a chance they have information, we have to take it." The general's gaze flicked between Patel and Elena, then to the encroaching ship on the hollow display. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "We'll attempt contact. But the moment it turns hostile, we neutralize the threat." The minutes dragged on, as the unknown ship closed the distance. Tension crackled through the air like a live wire. When the comms channel finally opened, the voice that emerged was cold and precise, each word clipped with purpose. "This is Commander Rate of the Obsidian Dawn. You are in possession of a biological anomaly that belongs to us. Surrender it immediately." Elena's blood ran cold. "They know about the child," she whispered. Sarok's claws flexed against the table. "You've unleashed a plague on the galaxy, and you think we'll just hand over our only lead? You misunderstand," Rate said, his tone unyielding. "The anomaly is not your salvation. It is the source of your destruction. Surrender it or face the consequences." Elena's mind reeled. "That doesn't make sense," she said, stepping closer to the comms panel. "The child's immune system is the key to stopping the virus, not spreading it." Rate's voice hardened. "You've seen what the virus can do. Have you asked yourself why it hasn't consumed the child? It is not immune, it is the carrier. The virus evolves through it, perfecting itself. As long as that anomaly lives, the virus will never stop adapting." The weight of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. The child wasn't just a survivor. It was the engine driving the plague forward. But even as the realization settled, another truth bubbled to the surface. "If you knew this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her, "why didn't you destroy the child yourself?" There was a pause, and in it, she heard something unexpected: hesitation. "Our orders were to contain it," Raid admitted. "But it escaped before we could act. Now, the only option is eradication." Sarok growled. "If you think we'll let you murder a child." "It is not a child," Raid snapped, his cold demeanor cracking. "It is the death of worlds." The comms cut abruptly, and alarms blared as the Obsidian Dawn powered its weapons. "Battle stations," Sarok roared. Elena stood frozen for a moment, her thoughts a whirlwind. The child was the key to the virus, both its propagation and its potential cure. Destroying it might stop the plague, but at what cost? She turned and ran, her boots pounding against the deck as she raced back to the lab. Tavarin looked up, startled, as she burst through the door. "They know," she said breathlessly. "They know about the child. They think destroying him is the only way to end this." Tavarin's expression darkened. "And you're starting to wonder if they're right." Elena didn't answer. She approached the containment unit, staring down at the boy. His glowing eyes met hers, unblinking, as if he understood the weight of the decision hanging over them. In the distance, the ship shuddered as the first volley of enemy fire struck. The battle had begun, but the war wasn't just outside. It was here, in this room, in the choice she had to make. Her hand hovered over the console, torn between the fear of what the child represented and the hope that he might still save them all.